Hi everybody, I'm Ian. I want to play games, but not here. This is perfect.
Mobile gaming. Now there's two types of mobile gamers. There's gamers and scum. But what makes us different?
Mario.
Mobile or handheld gaming has always been a big market, mainly for one company, Nintendo. Sony tried. Kinda. Sega made some. Microsoft has never done anything, unless you consider the Logitech G Cloud.
Nobody does.
But for Nintendo, mobile gaming has always been a big thing for them. I mean, they made the first handheld console. Well, the first successful handheld console. The Milton Bradley Microvision, the first ever handheld.
If you could call it that.
Milton Bradley actually made a lot of well-known board games. Yes, board games. What they were really known for. They created Battleship, Candyland, Twister? Yeah, the company that lets you get awkwardly close to people also lets you deter women. They also made the Game of Life. Not just once, but twice. But in 1979, they released the Microvision, a revolutionary product for the masses?
At least like 10 people bought it. Maybe 11.
It was pretty well received, I think. There's really not much online about it, but it's still cool. Something there is a lot about online is how the system kind of has a shelf life. Lots of people complain that the screens get something called screen rot, where the very primitive LCD or liquid crystal display actually leaks and makes the game unplayable.
I don't care about that. I want something that everybody has heard of.
Wow, this is awesome. A true mobile gaming experience? Tons of developer support? Multiple models?
What's it called?
Game Boy.
Really?
Despite the odd name, the Game Boy was a powerhouse. Not in the sense of the actual power of it, but the fact that it reached millions. 118 million to be exact. The Game Boy reached from gamers to just normal people, and a big reason for that is actually Tetris. You would think that it would be Mario, but no, it was actually most commonly packaged with Tetris, and it makes sense. Hank Rogers, the man who secured the rights for Tetris from a Russian game developer, told Minoru Arakawa, the president of Nintendo at the time, that if they wanted to sell the Game Boy to everybody, not just kids, they should package it with Tetris. And it worked. Oh boy did it work. To this day, Tetris is the third best-selling game of all time. Now, is this because it was a pack-in game? Maybe, but there were other Game Boy bundles at the time. But people were buying the Tetris bundle more than any other bundle. The Game Boy didn't stop there, it had quite a few revisions. The Game Boy Pocket and Lite were true revisions, making a slight difference to the console, but there was also the Color, Advance, and Advance SP. Now, to this day, there's still a huge amount of support for the Game Boy in the modding and hacking community. And even the original was discontinued in 2003, and it's still loved by plenty.
Man, what could make that any better?
Welcome to the newest game show on the air. What could be better than a Game Boy?
I'm your host, Game B Boy, and I hate my parents for how they named me. Let's welcome our first contestant, Ian. Where am I? Welcome to the show. Are you ready to play? No, please, I don't know where I am. That's great to hear. Let's get started with our first puzzle. Buzzing when you think you know it. And because we ran out of money, instead of a buzzer, you'll have a gun. I'm going to give you 3 clues. Ready? Begin. It was originally supposed to be sold alongside the Game Boy. It has 2 screens. Why was this loaded?
And this has been the finale of What Could Be Better Than a Game Boy? The Nintendo DS, another titan of handheld gaming. Selling even more than the Game Boy, the DS was revolutionary, and it was the first big console to add touch. The name, DS, kind of sums up the whole console, meaning dual screen.
It does have 2 screens, but that's like calling the Xbox... that's a bad example.
The DS was originally supposed to be the, quote, third pillar of the Nintendo console lineup.
But it has backwards compatibility with the Game Boy. By definition, that's a successor.
And the DS was even better received than the Game Boy. While the Game Boy reached out to everybody that cared, the DS reached everybody. This was in part due to the Touch Generation series of games? Not all the Touch Generation titles can be called games. Some of them, sure. These titles were mainly meant to be for adults and the elderly. You can see this from titles like 100 Classic Books, which has 100 books in the public domain, and Art Academy, which is mostly just a sketchpad. But there was some stuff that slipped through the cracks, these being actual games like Picross, Tap the Squares, and Tetris, It's Tetris, and then you have Elite Beat Agents. Yeah, Grandma's gonna love this one. There's also True Swing Golf, that's golf, and then there's one of the biggest DS games of all time, Nintendogs.
Does your child want a dog? Do you not want to have to inevitably take care of that dog when your children don't? Why not get the newest craze, Nintendogs? Can't kill this dog. My dogs!
Nintendogs was a huge game for kids, one of the best-selling DS games. You take care of a dog. That's it. There's no story, no missions, nothing. You play with, care for, and dress up your dogs.
But what about the competitions?
Yeah, you can take part in competitions, but they aren't really required. I knew quite a few people that loved these games, but I was never really into them.
Wow, Nintendo really dominated the mobile gaming market. But what else is there? Fine, make it quick.
Turbo Express, a portable version of the TurboGrafx 16. It can play the regular games from it, but none of the games from the CD add-on. 3 out of 10. The Atari Lynx, the first ever console with a backlit screen, but it sucks. The screen had a lot of blurring, which made it hard to see anything that moved quickly. 2 out of 10. The Sega Game Gear, which was widely considered to be the only actual competitor to the Game Boy. Sega ported a lot of their games from the Master System, which the Game Gear was heavily based on, meaning that it had a huge library of games. 6 out of 10. The Sega Nomad. After the success of the Game Gear, Sega tried to make a touchscreen successor to the Game Gear. It was too expensive, so instead they made the Nomad. The Nomad was a portable version of the Genesis. It wasn't a good one, but it existed. 4 out of 10. The Game.com. Actually, it's the Gamecom. Why have the dot when it's not actually part of the name? Created by Tiger Electronics, yes, that Tiger Electronics, the Gamecom was designed for an older audience. It didn't just play games, it also had PDA-style features. And it had internet through a modem. 2 out of 10. The Nokia N-Gage, which really borders on scum. It's a cell phone, it makes calls, but it also has a cartridge slot, meaning that you can play games, making it a handheld console, and this is very evident as you have to use it on its side. There were 58 titles for it, only 56 in the US, but it actually had some big names like Crash Bandicoot, Rayman, and Sonic.
Well, that's not what I really wanted. How about something from a AAA developer? That'll do.
The PSP, or PlayStation Portable, released around the same time as the DS did, and it was a really good competitor, having the longest lifespan of any Nintendo competitor at 10 years. A lot of games were released for it, over 1,000. Some notable games are God of War, Metal Gear Solid, GTA, and Monster Hunter. Although I have a PSP, I really don't have any memories. It was more the console that I played when I didn't want to play anything on my DS, but it did have a feature that the DS would never have: movies. Because the PSP actually used discs, it was very easy to put movies on it, and a lot of them were put on it. Some big names: Too Fast, Too Furious, Akira, Austin Powers, Bill and Ted, Cowboy Bebop. Plenty of great movies, and unlike the Game Boy video cartridges, the PSP wasn't extremely pixelated. They were just movies, but on the PSP. The PSP even did well enough that it got a successor, the PS Vita, which was a mistake. While the PSP sold about 80 million units, the PS Vita never hit 10 million, which doesn't really make sense. The PSP had a D-pad, 4 face buttons, and 2 triggers. The PS Vita had that, along with 2 analog sticks, and a touch screen and touch back. It could also play PS3 games streamed from your PS3, the first console to be able to do so. But the PS Vita wasn't very well received. It was well received by reviewers, but not for its games, more for its design and operating system. At the time, due to the high price of the Vita and its games, and the decreasing price of smartphones and their cheap or free games, the Vita flopped. There was also the PSP Go. Yeah, that one really sucked. It was a PSP, but it slid out, making it smaller. Sony also removed the disk drive, meaning you could only play digital, and with Sony using proprietary storage, it was limited to 32 gigabytes. Today, You can't even play any of those games without hacking it, and why would you go through all that trouble when you could just do the same thing on the PSP and get a larger, more comfortable form factor?
Well, most of the other companies' attempts sucked. So how about we just look at Nintendo again?
You know, lots of people really didn't like the 3DS, stating it's all a gimmick, but no, it's not. It's revolutionary. 3D, at home, in my hands, without glasses? That's right, the 3DS was the first good 3D console using stereoscopic 3D, meaning that you didn't need the red and blue 3D glasses or the polarized ones, just your eyes. There were still a lot of people who complained about the 3D, mainly because it could affect people with epilepsy, but you can just...
Was it really that hard?
You don't have to play the games with the 3D on. You can play them fine with it off, and you really won't lose anything. There was still enough backlash about it that Nintendo released the 2DS.
So it's just a DS.
Kind of. The 3DS had better hardware, meaning that it could play more intensive games like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D. A game that was so popular on the N64 was easily playable on this tiny console. Now the 3DS wasn't Nintendo's first try at 3D. It was actually their fifth, and the only one to actually succeed. But at this point, many people were tired of the DS, meaning that really only bigger Nintendo fans bought it.
One of the biggest problems with mobile consoles up to this point is they either get worse versions of games or old games, sometimes generations old. But in 2017, that all changed with Nintendo.
The Nintendo Switch. A hybrid console, meaning that it can be used as a home console or as a portable console, and this is awesome. I can play beautiful 3D games on the couch, then pick it up and resume playing somewhere else. And Nintendo didn't just make an amazing console, they also made some amazing games for it, launching with 1-2 Switch, a game that shows the potential of the gyroscopic controllers. Mario Kart, Splatoon 2, and the biggest game of that year, Breath of the Wild. One of the most anticipated Zelda games of all time, and a big reason that a lot of people bought the Switch.
I'm part of that group.
A full, huge, new Zelda game, and I can play it anywhere? And then there was a lull. Nothing else really caught anybody's attention for a few months. Until October. Kind of following the same open world design for Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey was huge. So many worlds, so much to do, and all on the weird home handheld console. Other than those big names, some other big reasons that people bought the Switch were Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Pokemon, Animal Crossing New Horizons, and more recently, Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.
Nowadays, Nintendo's really the only company making a handheld console, except for this tiny little developer that you've probably never heard of. Valve.
The Valve Steam Deck is only kind of a mobile console. It's more of a mobile computer, but not like a laptop. Sort of. Yes, it's mainly meant to play games, but all it is a computer. It has computer hardware, computer software, and can do computer things, like commit tax fraud. Although it's really just a computer, the Steam Deck has a lot of potential for gaming. Emulators run smooth on it, and AAA games you can play on PC do too, but now you can play them in other places.
I'm playing Chibi Robo.
A lot of people think that this could be the push that Nintendo needs to finally update the hardware of the Switch. Even in the OLED, we still have a 6-year-old console.
I really hope that mobile gaming continues to evolve, and maybe even one day Microsoft will join the party with something that's not just cloud gaming.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking. Want to keep up with what I'm doing? Consider subscribing as it helps me out a lot. Have any suggestions for videos? Leave a comment.